So today we're going to talk about the environmental effects of human carnivory. So first of all, we need to understand what human carnivory is if that's going to be our topic. And that is simply a meat consumption by humans. So you can use it interchangeably with eating meat. So when I use human carnivory, that's what I'm referring to. Today I'm going to talk about 7 topics, and one will lead into the other. And all of these topics that you see on the screen here today are interrelated. They all have to do with human carnivory and the environment. So these are some aspects of the environmental effects of diet and food that you may not have thought about, and I hope to stimulate some thinking here. Now, most of these parts of the talk are already published, like the Yellowstone wolves, the largest carnivores, the largest herbivores, climate change, Heart Mountain National Wildlife Refuge. The Bushmeat project is currently in review, but the others are already published in professional scientific journals. I also need to tell you that the views that I express today are mine and not necessarily those of my employer, Oregon State University. So I want to acknowledge the research teams for this work. There's over 40 scientists that have worked on the projects I'm going to describe to you today. And these people are from all the major continents in the world. And the ones in red are from Oregon, and the rest of them are from other states and other countries. Well, first, a little bit about me, a personal background. I was born into a ranching farming family in South Dakota, and this is my dad here long ago with some of his calves, and then this is me at 5 years old. And as I was a child, my dream was to someday become a cowboy. So as you'll see by the slides today, my dream has come true that I get to study cattle and their effects. So this is how this process started for me. I started working in Yellowstone National Park in the late 1990s. There was this issue of aspen trees. Aspen trees were disappearing, and no one really knew why. They were declining, and you can see here, there's no young aspen trees, and the old ones are dying out. That led me and my graduate student to go out to Yellowstone Park and try to uncover and solve this declining aspen mystery. What is the reason for the declining aspen trees? So we cored the trees and looked at the tree rings, and we aged those trees, and we found out by doing this age diagram. So on the y-axis here is the number of aspen trees, and across the bottom are the dates. So the 1800s are here, and then the present is over here. So these are the number of aspen that were regenerating around the turn of the century. And then soon after that, they declined. And we have just this lack of regeneration like you saw in that slide. What's interesting is that that's the same time that wolves were extirpated from the park. The US government killed the last wolf in 1926. So we thought maybe the aspen trees, the lack of them, are somehow connected to the loss of the gray wolf. So this is what we call the trophic cascade, from the predator to the prey to the plant. The wolf, the elk, and the aspen. Wolves eat elk eat aspen, therefore indirectly the wolves affect the aspen. That was our theory at that time. So why were the wolves eliminated? It has to do with human carnivory. Wolves are competition for hunters, and they also take livestock. So you see the connection with the need to get rid of wolves and human carnivory. So the wolves were absent from Yellowstone from 1926 to 1995, and this is what the scene looked like on the Lamar Valley on the northern range. Aspen were lounging around, and browsing down the willows and the young aspen and cottonwood trees. Their numbers got quite high without their natural predator. I started thinking, wow, this is looking a little bit like a livestock yard with that many elk there. Well, the good news is the wolves were reintroduced in 1995, and we wanted to ask this question. If our theory is right that wolves affect aspen, returning the wolves would be good for the aspen. So we expected to see more regeneration of aspen and other plants. So the wolves were brought back in 1995. Here's the Secretary of Interior, Bruce Babbitt, actually carrying wolves back in to the park. So we wanted to ask if the cottonwoods, willow, aspen, berry-producing shrubs would recover. This is the Grand Hotel I've stayed in for over 15 years doing research in Yellowstone. You have to duck to get in the doorway. These old cabins really have short doorways. And my colleague Bob Besch and I are analyzing data in that cabin in the evenings. But when they brought the wolves in, as a large carnivore, they immediately started eating elk. So they started preying on the elk, scaring them. These ravens here, guess how long it takes a raven to arrive at a kill site? 40 seconds on average. Well, let's look at the results of our research. 1997, willows on Soda Butte Creek. 2001, willows. Look at the difference in the willow growth. So we think this is that trophic cascade. By 2010, look at the willows. Go back to 2001, compared to 97, 2010. The growth is continuing. We can go over to Blacktail Deer Creek, and by 2002, they were starting to grow. But look at how this whole valley fills in with willows. This is what we like to see as ecologists, because lots of willows means there's food and habitat for other organisms, including birds and invertebrates and beaver. So these are some of the beaver works that we're now seeing on the northern range. These are some of the songbirds that have increased since the wolves have come back. So this is a recovery in process at Yellowstone. I encourage you to go out there and take a look for yourself. But it relates to wolf management in Oregon. Just last week, or this last week, Oregon decided to remove the wolf from the endangered species list. So this is a compromise, and one of the bigger issues on how many wolves to have in Oregon has to do with human carnivory as relates to livestock as another factor that needs to be considered on how many wolves are allowed. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the world's largest carnivores. Lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my. Did you like that movie as much as I did? The Wizard of Oz is just a classic. So worldwide, predators are being persecuted because they sometimes take livestock and they make their living eating wild game. So humans are in direct competition with these large carnivores for meat. Unfortunately, many of the large carnivores are threatened with extinction today, and the ones that I put a star by, all these that are starred, 19 species of the 31 largest carnivores are threatened with extinction. So you can look at your favorite animals on this list. Let's take one example, the tiger. Back in 1970, there were 40,000 tigers. Today, 3,200. So the tiger is on the brink of extinction, and it's in a very critical situation. We can go over to Australia and look at the dingo, which is closely related to the gray wolf. And dingoes sometimes take livestock in Australia, and they are commonly considered as vermin and sometimes hung up on trees as displays as to that they're not wanted in Australia. Let's move on to African lions. If you look at this map, the lions used to range all of these areas that are in the light beige color. Today, they are only in the dark brown. So see how the range has contracted? And the lions are considered threatened species now. And a lot of the times, the lions are persecuted for their direct, because they're persecuted because of livestock and then the protection of livestock. There's over 1 billion head of livestock in Africa. Lions have important ecological functions in limiting baboons, limiting their numbers. So lions will take baboons, and without lions, the baboon population erupts. There's so many baboons in some places in Africa that farmers need their children to stay home from school so they can guard the crops. The baboons are spreading diseases to humans, and there's impacts on the prey of the baboon. So we get these cascading effects when humans lose their top predators. These maps show some of the major threats to the large carnivores. Habitat loss, which seems obvious. Persecution, this is what I'm talking about in terms of directly killed by the humans. Utilization, where humans use the body parts of the carnivores, sometimes for traditional medicine or for furs. And this one is really big, depletion of prey. Humans are killing the prey of the large carnivores. Just in October, the New York Times reported that the lion population in Africa is likely to fall by 50% soon. How many people have heard about Cecil the lion? That was in the news, and lots of emotion around that, and that has to do with trophy hunting. So we think of, we can look at this painting by Corvallis artist Brittany West with the trophies on the wall and the white picket fence. She entitled this The American Dream. So this gets a lot of attention. It's highly controversial, but it's not, the numbers aren't there as, this is not the number one problem in keeping the species from extinction. It's the direct persecution that is going on at a much wider scale, especially to protect livestock. Well, let's check in on the world's largest herbivores and see how they're doing. They are the prey for the carnivores. Well, very similar to the carnivores, 60% of the large herbivores are threatened with extinction, 12 critically endangered today, and 58% have decreasing populations. So this is a list of the threatened large herbivores: bovids, camels, deer, elephants, horses, hippos, apes, rhinos, pigs, tapirs. These are the kind of species that the large carnivores need, but they're being wiped out in many places, especially in Southeast Asia and in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. Well, let's take these three characters as examples. The African elephant. The blue was the historical range, and the red is the current range. See how fragmented it is? The common hippo, the same, very similar to the elephant. But if things are even much worse for the black rhino. See, the current range polygons in red here are even much smaller. And the poaching is so heavy on the rhinos that I jiggled all these polygons so the poachers wouldn't see where the remaining ones are living. What are the main threats to these large herbivores? So we look at the number of threats, or the percentage of threats on the y-axis here, and the type of threat here. And these threats, you can read these for yourself, but they have to do with exploitation, livestock, land use change, and conflict. Now, these are going to add up to more than 100% because each animal typically has more than one threat. But if you look at the ones related to human carnivory and livestock, they are the ones in purple here on exploitation and the ones in green. So that's a pretty significant portion of the threat, of the total threats. Elephants, you may have heard about them in the news recently. In a recent 3-year period, 20% of all the elephants in Africa were killed by poachers, 100,000 elephants. They're being killed for the ivory market. Every 20 minutes, one elephant dies. Rhinos are consumed, the rhino horns are consumed for traditional medicine. These horns are ground up and used in traditional Eastern medicine, and the price of rhino horn exceeds that of gold by weight. And now for both the elephants and the rhinos, syndicated crimes involved and terrorist groups. There's a lot of money involved in these practices. Now we're going to move on to a broader topic, which is bushmeat hunting. And bushmeat is typically where animals are hunted or trapped, mostly in tropical forests for their meat, for their medicine, for their ornaments, or for live trade. This is done for subsistence or commercial trade. And I have 118 primate species threatened because of bushmeat hunting. 80 ungulate species, 31 bats, and 24 carnivore species. Let's talk about them for a minute. I'm working with a PhD student from Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, and he is walking for 2 years in Africa to understand what is going on there with all of the animals, the livestock, and the poaching. So this is Chris Everett with his GPS and his gear as he's collecting data. He sends me messages in InReach, Delorme, so I get these cryptic messages, and when I get a message, it shows me his location, and then he sends a little note along with it. So it's neat to be in communication with him when he's in the bush. These are some of the types of things he's finding. Snares are a huge problem in both, in many areas. These wire snares are used to trap the animals, and then once they are caught in the snare, then later the trappers come back and skin the animals, dry the meat. In this case, here is the carcass of an elephant that he found. He has these camera traps set up so we can see where these, what's going on. So he records the people and the animals that move in front of his camera traps. Here are the poachers with elephant tusks, and then this right here is an AK-47 machine gun that they use. They walk into Kruger National Park in the morning, and they're looking for rhinos. If they can't find one, they shoot an elephant on the way back and take the tusks. Here's an example of, this is an aerial photograph map. This is a pond. And here he mapped out where the snares are. And any animal, the animals that are trying to get to the pond have to cross through these snares to make it, and they're getting trapped. Here's an example of the wire snares, and then on top are some leg hold traps that they picked up. Now the organized poachers are seeing that the vultures are circling above where the carcasses are, and the vultures are tipping off the park rangers as to where the poachers are. So now the poachers are poisoning the carcasses, and now the vultures are in trouble, and they're being threatened. Here's a camp of a witch doctor, thinks that if he eats lion meat, that it will make him strong. So here's the skin of a lion, and there's the lion meat that he has hanging out on the line. In Africa, livestock are very abundant, but they're not regularly consumed. for subsistence. Instead, they're kept as a means for storing wealth and as a status symbol. Here's an example of a herd of livestock. Many tons of bushmeat are imported into Britain and other countries every year. One disturbing fact is that animals cause 70% of emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases to humans. AIDS from primates, Ebola from primates and bats, SARS from bats. These animals are killed and consumed by humans. Here's a plate of bats. Some researchers investigated the luggage coming into the Paris airport, and estimated 260 tons of bushmeat are smuggled into the Paris airport every year. Here's just 12 of the species that we're talking about of the 301 that are threatened because of bushmeat. Camels, chimpanzees, pangolins, tapirs, leopards, clouded leopards, and the list goes on. Here, the reason I made this slide is to try to put a face on the conservation issue. Well, now we can go to a rosier topic, climate change. What does that have to do with this? Well, climate change is happening in Oregon. Anyone know where this is? Detroit Lake. So these are the docks on Detroit Lake, and there's the water level down here. So this isn't something for the future. Climate change is happening now. The number of days in Portland, greater than 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So 2011, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Look at that change. Did you think it was getting hotter in town here or not? And now this is short-term data, which I caution you to be a little bit leery of, because it really takes a longer time period. But it just seems like we're getting some kind of upward trend in temperatures. Well, so let's look at a long-term record, 2,000 years of greenhouse gases. So we have carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas, methane, and nitrous oxide are also greenhouse gases that don't get much press. They're all doing the same thing. Up until recently, they were all relatively low, and then they all just took off, practically off the charts. So most people talk about carbon dioxide, and that is true. It is the biggest greenhouse gas here, and most abundant in the blue, but I think much more emphasis should be placed on methane. We just don't talk about methane much. Some scientists believe that without considering these other gases, that anything we do with CO2, carbon dioxide, will not be enough. What's really to our advantage is methane has a much shorter atmospheric lifetime than carbon dioxide, only 9 years. Carbon dioxide is over 100 years, and maybe much more. So if we're looking for a way to mitigate climate change, it makes sense to look at the short-term benefits for reducing methane. So let's ask where methane comes from. That's a good thing to know. Well, the major sources of anthropogenic methane in the world today, ruminants, natural gas, oil industry. This is from leaky pipes mostly on natural gas lines. Landfills, biomass burning coal, and rice. This is from the rice paddies. So ruminants, what are ruminants? Cattle, goats, sheep. This is domestic livestock. These are the ruminating animals that emit large amounts of methane. On average, 25 million ruminant livestock have been added to the planet each year. That's about 2 million per month over the past 50 years. So we're now up to over 3.6 billion ruminants, and these are large animals. So let's look at this. This is called a life cycle diagram that shows how your food choices impact greenhouse gas emissions. So the greenhouse gas emissions are shown on this axis, and the food type here. So the ruminant livestock are shown in the orangish red here as being much higher than the non-ruminant livestock, and both categories are much higher than the vegetable products, such as the meat substitutes, for example, or the beans, the peas, and the soy. Just a fraction of what some of these others are. When we published that, the press ran with it. So you can see some of the press, what they were saying about our article, and we had one sentence in the article suggesting that maybe there should be a tax on meat for climate purposes, and this is a very mildly put in the article, or maybe a cap and trade system to help mitigate climate change. And the press liked it, but I'm not sure what others have thought about that. Except I do know what Richard Branson thinks. Anybody know Richard Branson? He's the owner of Virgin Airlines, a strong environmentalist. He saw that last chart, this one here, and put out a press release that he'll never eat beef the rest of his life. So there's one convert, at least on the ruminant side of it. That was interesting. Now, I guess more seriously, I'm concerned that the climate is getting near a tipping point. These could tip to major catastrophic climate change. So whatever we can do for carbon and methane, I think would be increasingly pressing. This is a map that shows the Earth's land mammals by weight. So one of these little squares in this map represents 1 million tons of weight, of animal weight. Humans are animals, so we are in the center of the diagram. So this is how much humans weigh across the entire world. Here, cattle are on the left. That looks a little bit more than humans, the cattle alone. Up here are the pigs, the goats, the sheep, the horses. And then the wild animals are in green squares. Elephants get 1 square, and then the other wild animals in the world get the other green squares. So this shows you the magnitude of the difference between human biomass, livestock biomass, and wild mammal biomass. Human population is projected to go up to over 9 billion people by 2050. So that's a fairly significant increase. But meat production is expected to go up to over 450 million tons per year by 2050. Well, what can we do about it? One thing we could do is substitute beans for beef. Now that might seem like an interesting idea to you, but we ask the question, if all of the beef consumed in the United States was consumed as beans, what would be the climate savings? How much ground would we gain towards our climate mitigation goals? And the goals that are set for 2020, we would achieve 47% of our goal if we just did this one diet change. Now I understand this is a major diet issue, but it serves the purpose of showing how important what we do every day, maybe 3 times a day, is on the climate and the environment. Let's move over to Heart Mountain, Oregon. Has anybody been to Heart Mountain? A few of us. It's right here in southeastern or south central Oregon. It's a national wildlife refuge. And until 1990, they had cattle grazing on the refuge. But in 1990, the managers decided to remove all of the cattle, all of a sudden. So what we did is we studied at these sites here on Heart Mountain, we studied how that might have affected the streamside areas, how it might have changed the environment in Heart Mountain. We wanted to know if just removing the cattle, the ecosystem would flourish again. So you can be the judge here. This one was taken in 1990, and here's a repeat photo in recently, 2013. So this stream now has healed itself. So there's more willows, and there's been studies showing more birds and other wildlife. 1990, October, 2013, October. Here's a seep in 1990 in 2013, and here's another stream in 1990 versus 2013. Look at this channel here from the summer of '87 versus the summer of 2013. The sedges are just filling in the channel. This is what we like to see. Also here on this example, see the sagebrush growing right in the floodplain? That's what's called a disconnected floodplain because the erosion was so high there was downcutting on the stream. So the floods would not come over the stream. They would just shoot right down the main channel. Here we have more flooding, and with this increased moisture in the floodplain, we have a decrease in sagebrush, and the water-loving plants are back. This is quite phenomenal. So if you want to see more, you can go to our website here, which I'll show at the end of the slideshow. I'll show this again. I'm going to try to show a 2-minute video clip, and we'll see if this technology is going to work for me. The only thing the managers did was remove the cattle. And then we just stand back and watch what happens. Aspen and willows are streamside biodiversity indicators. These woody plants connect with the birds. You can hear the understory shrubs and flowers. It's just incredible to see this. When the cattle were here in these meadows, the aspen would stay about this tall. They would be eating the small branches and the leaves. All the cattle were removed in 1990, and then we got this incredible flush of aspen here. So we have these young ones that are less than 25 years old, and then in contrast, we have these very large old ones that are just on their way out. This is about a 70-centimeter diameter aspen tree. Originated in the 1800s, before livestock arrived on Hart Mountain. This one here is 2.2 centimeters diameter. This came in about 10 years ago. We've taken some photographs since the cows have come off and compared those to what the willow looked like with the cows on the refuge, and it's just night and day. Just an incredible flush of willow and aspen all through this streamside area. It's quite a spectacle to see how nature can recover if it's just left on its own, how it can restore itself. I highly recommend a trip to Hart Mountain. They have good hot springs there too. Okay, I'm going to end by talking about environmental nutrition. This is the interrelationship between our food choices, our environment, and our health. It just so happens that the diet effects on health and climate are similar. The first top two charts are from the Adventist Health Study, and this first one is about hypertension, and this is vegan, lacto-ovo-vegetarian, and meat eater. See how the hypertension rates go up as you go to more carnivorous diet. Here, diabetes, you have a very similar vegan, lacto-ovo-vegetarian, meat eater. If we go down here to greenhouse gas emissions, vegan, lacto-ovo-vegetarian, and meat eater. So it's interesting to see the strong correlation between effects on climate and effects on personal health. Here my colleague Dr. Hans Diehl is describing plaque buildup in the arteries from diets high in cholesterol. I think of these arteries as streams in the body's ecosystem. So we have blood flowing through these streams. This is an angiogram from Dr. Esselstyn. Here is from a meat eater. And this is after this person stopped eating the meat on the right. I think it was 3 years later. This stream or artery looks a lot better than it did here. And the only thing that this person did was eliminate the animal products. Then again, on the landscape, we can see the difference in years later after removing the livestock. Environmental nutrition, interesting how that works that way. We recently published this, Biodiversity Conservation. The key is reducing meat consumption in the science of total environment. Brian Machuvina and Ken Freely and I did this work. Here's a graph that we put in that article. We have, and this is a diagram showing the environmental effects of human carnivory. So right off the bat, we can see that the direct effects have to do with bushmeat hunting, as we've looked at, pasture creation, grazing, intensive livestock production, monoculture, feedlot cultivation. And then these are secondary cascading effects from those first cascades. The ones in blue are climate change cascades. As you can look at like the methane production or in various fertilizer effects. And then the ones in green are non-climate change and other types of environmental and biodiversity effects. So we can add the human ecosystem in here as part of the effects, and you're seeing a lot of that at the conference this weekend, human diseases, malnutrition, where a lot of the food goes into feed crops rather than to humans, which is a food security issue. So in general, if you can remember one thing, good for the planet, good for the person. Thank you for your attention and for coming out today. Okay, we have time for questions.